Welcome to another episode of The Heart of the Matter TV. On today's episode, we'll be discussing marriage as a partnership between a man and a woman. So, Pastor Wale, what's your definition of marriage?
Well, let me give you God's definition of marriage. Okay. God says, a man shall leave his father and his mother and shall cleave unto his wife, and they two shall become one. So marriage is when a couple leave their different parents and form a family unit of their own. And in God's eyes, they are no longer two, they are now one. So marriage is really the building block of any society.
Okay. And some people say they don't need a piece of paper or a certificate to prove their love for their partner. So what are your thoughts on that, Omilola?
I think the certificate sort of makes it more formal and it makes it accountable. So without the certificate, for instance, if you're just dating someone, you can easily break up. But with marriage, it's a whole lot of, even in the Catholic Church, apparently you can't even divorce at all. So I think it's important that it is formalized.
I also, to add to what you've said, when you actually go through a marriage ceremony, you've made a level of commitment that shows that you're serious about the marriage. If you just start living together and say, we don't need a piece of paper, there probably isn't enough commitment to make that marriage last.
And what are some other common misconceptions about marriage?
Well, lots of people, I think, just get into marriage because they're getting to a certain age and the biological clock is ticking and they need to get married, okay? But marriage is not about that. Again, there's this idea, the love, okay? And a lot of people don't understand love, okay? That romantic love that brings people together in a marriage doesn't last the course of the marriage. It has to be kept alive. And it can only be kept alive by the unconditional love that the Greeks call agape love. That's another misconception of marriage. Again, in the African setting, another misconception is it is purely for the procreation of children.
So what do you say to people who feel like they're under pressure from their parents to get married?
Well, in an African setting, that is always the case. As soon as you get to a certain age, and I think this is more with the girls, the pressure is next, when are you going to bring somebody home? And so lots of pressure. And the problem with the pressure is it can force somebody into the wrong marriage. Right. Okay, I think that young people should learn to be friendly, should learn to be open with one another so that they meet people. You're not going to meet people if you spend all day at home. Right. You don't go out, you don't socialize. And you're not going to get married unless you do go out and socialize. I think that should happen. And I think that what happens is if you socialize, you first of all meet people that become friends, because marriage partners have to be friends first and foremost. Right. And if there's no friendship between them, it's just a contract. They have to be friends, and I think first of all you find somebody who is your friend first, and then after you've known each other up to a point, you can begin to think about marriage.
My question is, how do you know it's the right time, or how do you know you're ready to get married? You find that especially with men, a lot of men will say, I'm not ready, I need to make a certain amount of money before I get married. Or with women, you find that you feel like immediately you finish school, you need to start thinking. So when do you know, when is the right time to get married? When do you know it is the right time?
Well, I think the time for men is a little different to the time for women. For a man, he has to be able to look after his wife and the children when they come. So if a man cannot afford a roof over his own head, then there's going to be a problem putting a roof over your family's head. Now, if you're waiting to get to a certain level, the chances are you will never get to that level. And what I mean by that is the goalpost keeps shifting. okay, now I can afford to buy a car, but I need to be able to buy a second car, and so on and so forth. So there comes a time when you just have to take the plunge. The Bible talks about the wife of your youth. So it doesn't anticipate getting married when you become an old man. Okay, so you need to take the plunge. I think that the better marriages are the ones that happen between people who have built together. They both started their careers and all that together, so that one is not going to say, I was already established before you came along.
We're going to be talking to Mr. and Mrs. Olajoyegbe on their experiences as husband and wife. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Heart of the Matter, where we've been talking about partnership in marriage. And with me right now is the first of our two guests, Mr. Diran Olufunmi, who will be talking to me, man to man, about partnership in marriage. Now, Diran, your wife is an icon, yes, in the Nigerian gospel music industry. Her name is known across the length and breadth of this country. And you're the man behind the woman. She's the one that is on stage. She's the one that gets recognized when you go to ShopRite and all those different...
And I'm Olufunmi's husband.
And you are Olufunmi's husband.
Yes.
You're not Diran anymore. How do you handle that? Is that ever the source of any problems? Or how do you handle it? Tell us.
There are many ways to put it. She's my wife, and I married everything that comes with her. So one of the ways I look at things is that me being referred to as Olufunmi's husband is part of the deal. To me, it's like a part of my success story at helping my wife become all that God has called her to be. So if I give her the support in doing what God has called her to, then I'm successful as well. So it doesn't really bother me at all that she's succeeding at what God has called her to do. Actually, I'm happy about it.
Okay. So now, you are in partnership, in a marriage. That partnership involves her career, your children's destinies and futures, and so on. There's so many things involved in that partnership. How did you build that partnership over the years?
I'll say the basic principle for us, for both of us, for me and I, is mutual respect for one another and recognizing where you need to let go or where you need to stand in and help. Nobody can really build a marriage alone. I don't know if I'm making any sense there, but...
Absolutely. Let me ask a question. Yes. Because I've had to raise children as well with my wife. How do you, as a couple, come into agreement on raising children? For instance, what schools the kids go to can become an issue between a couple if you're not agreed. So how do you get around those? One of the
things for us, especially, I've always believed that my children are sent of God. God has given them their own assignment. So what we do often is find out what the child naturally wants to do. And from guiding the child to mold that desire that he has into something more fitting into the society and still doing what God has called him to do, we always arrive at something that makes sense. Then what we do is research.
I don't know whether you had children like my children. My children knew how to play us. How to play us, their parents. They would go to mommy and ask for something. If mommy said no, they would come to me and say, not tell me that they've been to mommy.
Yeah.
I said, yes.
What we did then, what I did was that when the children came to ask me for anything, I'll tell them, go ask your mom. Okay. So technically,
you have whispered in her ear that they're coming and this is what they should say.
Even if I don't, she knows that if they come to her to ask for something, she'll say, okay, hold on, let me just discuss it with your dad. Okay. So there's a system that makes sure that anything they're asking, both of us get to know.
The scriptures say, can two walk together except they are agreed?
Yes.
Marriage is a partnership.
Yes.
A partnership involves two people.
Yes, sir.
At least a marriage partnership. And therefore, how do you make time to develop that partnership? Because every partnership needs time.
The first thing I would say is, why are you working? I mean, that's the way my approach. If you're working to make things better for your family or for your home, then the next question I'll ask you is that, how come the work is killing the purpose for which you're working? If you think that way, then you realize that you have to have boundaries. You can't plunge yourself so much into work that the purpose for which you are working is defeated. So if you have a work that takes you totally away from your family, or a job that takes you totally away from your family,
Okay.
I think you should just look for another job. There must be a balance between the time you spend with your wife and children and your work. And I believe God provides regardless, you understand? Because sometimes we've taken provision into our own hands. We are going to provide. But God looks at what we do, and He knows where to pad it up for us. So you must find a balance. That's what I'm saying.
We're running out of time.
Yeah.
But I need to ask you this question, and I can only give you 30 seconds to answer it. What does it mean to be the man in a marriage partnership?
I think to be the man in a marriage partnership, for me, is to make sure that the interest of every other member of that family is put first before yours all the time. So that at the end of the day, when you say this is how it should be, people really submit to what you are saying, because they know that you are the one that leads the drive of making sure that everybody is happy. If you don't give the confidence that you are that guy in the family, you will have quite a bit of challenges. People, I don't know what he means by that. So it takes a lot of commitment from big guy. I think that's...
Thanks very much, Diran. Now, we'll be back in our next segment talking to your wife with our other presenters. So stay tuned to The Heart of the Matter. We'll be back talking about partnership in marriage.
Welcome back to the Heart of the Matter TV. We have with us Mrs. Olufunmi Olajoyegbe, a gospel artist in Nigeria. So we're talking about marriage today, the marriage partnership. So can you tell us how you met your husband, Diran?
Ooh. Okay, the first time I met him, actually the first time he met me, I was 14
Wow.
and he was 15. I don't remember him. I just remember him as one of the 3 young men who came to visit my younger brother. And I was completely in the dark. I didn't know they'd actually come because they wanted to meet me. Oh. I thought my younger brother was really cool, that he has all these older guys who are his friends, you know, who have come over. And I just stayed in one corner reading a book, and they didn't really get to talk to me at all. They just say hi. My husband was like disappointed that, you know, why did he even bother coming? But over the years, because I was singing, I've been singing since I was a child. We got to meet several times. I still didn't really take notice of who he was, but eventually I was with a group called Project, and eventually we went to record in a studio, and he happened to be the engineer, you know, running the studio, and that's where it all started.
Wow.
So how did you know that he was the one?
How did I know? I think it was over a process of time. One thing that always endeared me to him was that he always made me laugh. And I was never bored, you know. And you could be with somebody, you know, I'd had a few, you know, relationships, and sometimes you're just kind of bored with the person. But with him, I was never bored. There's never a bored moment. You know, there's always something interesting, you know, to talk about or to do. And he's, you know, I saw in him somebody who's a visionary, in the sense that he always has something that he's looking towards, and he's passionate about it. You know, and for me, I found that inspiring. I love people who have a dream, you know, and who they have something that motivates them to keep on doing things, you know. So
It's amazing. How long have you been married?
We've been married 23 years.
Wow, it's amazing how when I mentioned his name, you lit up.
up.
You know, and after 23 years, wow, he must be doing something really
Yes.
good. Can you tell us how you manage the different phases of marriage? So you find that the relationship part, the kids, you know, how do you balance all of this?
I'd say really I believe God has taught us over the years. You know, initially you heard my husband talking. Initially, I don't think we quite got it right. The timing, you know, with my husband's job at that time, initially it was a bit tough.
Yeah.
But over the years, you know, being prayerful, my husband is my best friend. So even when we didn't agree on things, we could still, as friends, you know, sit down and discuss and talk. And over time, he learned to recognize what I was feeling, understand what I was feeling, and I learned to understand, you know, that this is a man. You know, when you're dealing with a man, you must leave him room to be a man. You know, if you try to be the part of a man, you're beginning to undermine his very footing within the marriage. And over the years, I think God taught us how to manage that. So in every situation, he still makes me feel that I'm a woman, I'm precious to him, he loves me. I never ever doubt the fact that my husband loves me. And I have learned that, look, I have to respect him, even when I don't agree necessarily with his decisions. You know, I have somebody up there I can talk to and say, God, I don't think this is right, you know. And, you know, you'd be amazed how sometimes God will just tell you, no, he's making the right decision. Other times, he just come, you know, out of the blue and say, for me, you know, I think that maybe we should do it this way or that way. And then also he respects my opinion. Whatever it is we're about to embark on, about to do, he'll always, like his sounding board. What do you think? You know, and in those moments, there's areas where we disagree, you know, but, you know, on some, you know, I think on some issues there, you may have a difference of opinion, but you also find that in some situations, there's no 100% right way to do a thing. They're just different ways of doing things. And I've learned that, you know, give your husband room to express himself. And very often, he may just come back and say, you know, let's try your way, you know.
So you also work with your husband. Yes. How do you manage conflicts, especially with work? I was reading an article in Forbes the other day, and it was about this couple, successful couple. They worked together, and the lady said her husband made a business decision that she didn't quite agree with, and so she decided to resign. And everyone else was like, how can you resign? It's going to affect your marriage. And she said, no, it wouldn't. Marriage is different from work. We sort of separate the two. So how do you manage conflicts? Because I'm sure you have conflicts.
I think being a Christian, you have an ace. Because, you know, ultimately you're putting your trust in God. So there may be some decisions that you might not necessarily agree with, but I think that if you take it to God in prayer, I mean, if I tell him that, oh, you know, I'm not so clear on this, or I don't necessarily, you know, agree with this, you know, for me, I'll always go back and I'll pray about it. And I'll also say, okay, God, open my eyes, you know, help me to see what my husband is seeing. You know, very often men tend to, at least my husband tends to see a really big picture, you know, and I'm very into the details of everything. And, you know, I find that God very often, he just opens up, you know, how it's all fitting in together. If there are times when the decisions I don't necessarily agree with, and I'm, you know, yes, I don't agree with this. If he's set on saying that, no, this is the decision I've made, I'm his wife, I have chosen that I will submit to his own decisions, to what he wants to do, unless of course it's life-threatening, which it has never been up until now, thank God, and will never be. And I find that if you're just prayerful, you'll find that God can make it work, no matter what. It's not, I think resigning is a bit extreme. You know, if you're friends, I think you should be able to resolve it. And there's nothing wrong with stepping back and saying, okay, let's go with you. You know, so.
And how do you balance, you know, being a mother and work? How do you balance raising your kids whilst working?
I think that's one of the advantages of working with your husband, is that when you need to take time off, you can. Initially, when we got married, I didn't work. I stayed with the children, and that was a conviction I had from God. And I think, I look back now, I think that was God's wisdom, because that was a period of time my husband was working, those late hours, and he was hardly ever around for any of us. And I was there for the children. I was able to stay at home, keep the fort. And when things began to ease up, he changed his job. I was able to become a little more involved in what he was doing, and I was still able to spend time with the children. Our children were able to come to work with us. When I needed to stay at home, we'd stay at home. And then there was another thing my husband always did. He always arranged for us to have at least a month of holiday all together at the same time. And we'd all travel together, and we'd spend that time together. We have these famous road trips, across the states from one coastline to the other coastline, and we're together. So you're forced to interact. You're forced to spend time with one another. And I can say boldly that we are all friends. My children are friends with us. Should I say our children are friends with us? We are friends with them.
Do any of the kids want to follow in your footsteps?
Singing, no. No, disappointment. But
We've kind of run out of time now, so when can we expect a new album?
Well, I would like to boldly say before the end of this year, but I'll see by God's grace before the end of this year. I've been very involved in ministry, so I'm trying to get back into recording now.
Thank you very much, Olufunmi, for coming on the show. We look forward to having you again. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Heart of the Matter. We're joined now with Pastor Wale, who's going to share some marriage advice. So Pastor Wale, what would be the most important advice that you'd have for our viewers, about marriage?
Well, there's so many things that one could advise couples on, but I think the first or the most important is that conflicts will come. There's no marriage that will not have conflicts, and you've got to learn how to resolve conflicts before they come. And I'll give you some of the tips that I've heard and used. Number one is do not let the sun set on your wrath. So if a couple go to sleep every night facing each other, they will have no choice but to talk through the problem. Okay? If they back each other, then they might leave the problem festering. And what happens is when a problem festers, it just gets worse. Okay? And then you've got to design a way that you resolve conflicts. Don't take them to members of your families, because long after you've gotten over it, the families still remember. Okay? So I think the key advice I would give is learn how to resolve conflicts between the two of you, and as much as possible, keep everybody else out, even the children. I grew up not knowing that I never saw my parents have a harsh word or shout at one another. As far as we were concerned, they were doing great. Okay? It wasn't until we were a lot older that we realized that from time to time they did disagree, but they managed to resolve their problems behind closed doors.
And Omi, you've been married 8 years. Is there anything you'd like to share with our viewers about your take on marriage?
I think for me it's communication. Communication is key. One of the things my husband and I are doing more now is we're talking a lot more. So it's important to just talk. So even if you may have an issue and you're feeling a certain way, and the other person may just be oblivious to how you're feeling, but once you talk about it, you realize that they didn't even probably mean it. It wasn't intentional, So I think communication is so important. Talk, and talk.
I want to add a little bit to the talking. A lot of the time couples come together and talk, but they're talking about how to pay the bills, they're talking about what kids the school the kids should go to, and they're not talking as much about their relationship. So there has to be time made when you can talk about the two of you.
Exactly.
and how you feel about each other and so on. I think that's important as well.
Well, I've heard time and time again that men don't like talking, that men are wired differently. Men are very logical and women are very emotional. So how do you find that balance?
Men and women are different. I'll give you that much. Men tend to be goal-oriented, whereas women tend to be more emotional. So a woman wants to know how you react to what she's saying. She doesn't really care too much about what you are saying, it's how you react to what she's saying. Men are also not good at multitasking. So if a man is reading the newspaper or he's watching football on television, it's not the best time to bring up an important subject, okay? So you've just got to learn about each other. One of the things we pray for every couple that gets married is we pray for them that they will learn more about each other every day and how to adjust to what they learn, okay? I think that's important. So all this stuff about men and women are different. They're two friends. They can get together if they try.
And what can we say to the singles out there, you know, who are looking and praying for their spouse?
Most important thing is to stand in faith. Don't let anything take your faith away. You will marry because that is God's plan. He said it is not good for a man or woman to be alone. So you just have to be resolute. You have to be persistent in your faith. And in time, God will do it.
Well, on that note, we have to say goodbye. Thank you, Pastor Wale, and thank you, Omilola. We'll be back next week with another edition of The Heart of the Matter. Goodbye.